Hey loves, welcome back. Once again, we are talking about season 6 of Love is Blind. And as promised, this video is dedicated entirely to AD. So if you want my thoughts on all the other couples and AD and Clay together, go see my previous video for that. But again, we're just talking about AD because as a Black woman, I have thoughts. First of all, I waited to record this video until I had time to watch the reunion special because I wanted to see if AD had grown from her time on the season. If you don't know, by the time the reunion special was recorded, it was about a whole year after their time in the pods. And my answer to that is sadly, no, I don't think she's grown at all. I do think that we have to talk about some common themes that I see with her and, as a dating coach that I also see with some of my clients. I want to talk about something that I saw pointed out a lot. There was a picture of AD and her family on her wedding day, when she should have married Clay. And people kept pointing out that it was all women in the photo and that there was no male influence to guide her and to point out the fact that, Clay was trash. Um, and I say that jokingly because yes, Clay had issues, but I also believe that, you know, Clay also needs some growing up and some healing and all of that. And I don't think he's a trash person. I just think that, you know, he needs some time and he's in no way ready to get married. But back to the whole idea of AD not having male influence, not having male role models with her father having passed away. Yeah, that's true. But too often I see the discussion centering on, Black women as single mothers and not enough discussion about the men who left and holding them accountable and being more intentional about encouraging men to stay in the home, encouraging men to be around for their children. I think we need to have those discussions a lot more often as well. But as far as coming from a more empowered place of what AD can do about something like that, when I work with my clients, one of the first things that I have them do, after getting clear on what it is they want in a relationship, identifying the unhealthy patterns that they have in relationships is also getting clear about the current circle that they have, the environment they're in, who they're being influenced by, who they are talking to, who they're getting relationship advice from, and yes, who their mentors and role models are. And I think that there's not enough discussion about the importance when it comes to relationships of having people of both genders that you can look up to. So, I'm talking in heterosexual relationships, of course, it is important for a single woman if marriage is your goal. And I want to say that clearly because I understand not all women want to get married, not all women want to have children. But you would agree that if you are looking to improve in the business world, in the corporate world, that having mentors is a great way to get ahead in business. It is the same in relationships. So, yes, women who come to me are obviously hiring me as a coach, and that is a great starting point for, being able to identify your patterns, have a healthy relationship. And I think also, in my case, I am married, so I can talk to my clients about that process and about married life and what that entails. But at the same time, you also just need to increase in your environment happily married couples. So for some women, that starts with social media, just finding couples that they can look up to and that they can admire, and not just like the cutesy couple goals type stuff on TikTok and Instagram. There's nothing wrong with that, but there are also married couples on TikTok and on Instagram who and on YouTube as well, who actually talk in detail about their relationships and about their communication issues and how they handle these things. not just, doing dance videos or romantic trips. They go beyond that. They go deeper. Finding those influences is important, and also leaning into your community for that. So most of the women I work with are women of faith. So they are Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, etc. So finding happily married couples in your church, your mosque, your synagogue, whatever your place of faith is incredibly helpful to be able to look up to them and have that influence. If you are not religious, or if you're just looking outside of your faith for those role models, being involved in your community, being involved in working with charities and nonprofits. Oftentimes you'll see the head of these organizations are married, and having those couples that you can look up to, and by working with them, maybe getting the chance to know them and seeing their relationship up close can be very helpful. So it is unfortunate when a woman does not grow up with a lot of male influence. I will say I'm very blessed in that my parents have been married for 40 years. Also, growing up in my church, I had plenty of friends. My parents had friends who were married. My friends' parents were married. Even outside of church, in my school and neighborhood, I had friends who had married parents. So I grew up seeing a lot of married couples, and that being normalized for me, you know? So if you didn't have that growing up, seeking that out as an adult is important, because one, as a woman, you have a woman who sets that example. You can see in her marriage the things that you want, and also the things that you don't want. You can look at a couple's marriage and be like, okay, when I'm married, I would like this. I don't like the way that they do these things, but I can kind of understand why that works for them. It just wouldn't work for me. Being able to identify those things is important. Also, as you get close to this woman, sometimes you have the opportunity to be closer to the couple as well. And then you can have that male influence. You may have the husband of a friend looking out for you in like a sisterly way, being able to spot red flags in a man. So that is very important. The other thing that I want to point out that I saw with AD is this constant objectification. So, first, I want to point out the objectification by the white cast members on Love is Blind. So, the whole thing with Chelsea and Jimmy, and pointing out the fact that AD was stacked, then Laura and the whole bean dip comment, those were completely, totally uncalled for. And the idea that it was just jokes is something that I think that you have to be completely tone deaf to see those as just jokes in a society that denigrates Black women a lot, that has a history of objectifying Black women, especially if you live here in the United States and you think about the history of slavery and the way that white slave masters treated Black women, raped them. Like, there's just so much entangled into our identity that makes that very offensive. And before you say something that like that was a long time ago, look up epigenetics, look up that word. It is this idea that trauma in the mother's womb is carried down for 8 generations. If you go back 8 generations, you're talking about in slavery days. So that is still within the DNA of Black women. Beyond that, though, AD had, first of all, AD should have spoken up more. I think she definitely should have defended herself more and totally would have been in the right. I get why she didn't because of the angry Black woman trope, but I think she should have. But also, AD had a tendency to objectify herself. She talked about being on Love is Blind because she wanted someone to value her for her and see her as a person. You saw how upset she got with Clay when Clay was in the pods asking her to describe what she looked like. Yet at the same time, she constantly pointed out her looks. She had no problem showing off her body and taking those compliments from Clay when they finally did see each other. Even on their wedding day, he was making comments about how she looked in the dress, and she accepted that. Honestly, before he called things off, once he started doing that as she was walking down the aisle, she should have turned around right then and walked out. But she allowed it. And it is part of a self-worth and self-esteem thing to see herself as one-dimensional, to see herself as useful for her body. She talked herself about not feeling worthy of being of marriage or being worthy of finding someone who truly loved her. And I get that. When you have those worthiness wounds, it is easy to lean into whatever is easiest. So in her case, that would be her looks. I know for me, for years, I struggled with perfectionism, and a lot of it came from feelings of unworthiness. And from a very young age, I was always pointed out as being very smart. I was in um, challenge in the high achiever programs and in the advanced classes, all of that stuff. And, very early on in my 20s, a lot of the times I did not feel worthy unless I was constantly accomplishing, constantly proving how smart I was. It takes a lot of work to overcome that, to finally be at a place where you can be happy with yourself for who you are, and not what you do, how you can entertain others, how you can be an object for others. In the case of AD, it takes a lot of work to get past that. And I'm sure AD is already doing that work now. And if so, I commend her for that. But this allowing yourself to be objectified sets yourself, it sets you up for disaster. It sets you up for being in relationships that are very superficial. The third thing that I wanted to talk about with AD is being Delulu. There's so much on TikTok about Delulu is the Salulu and, faking it until you make it, believing it until it comes true, manifesting it. And I think all of that to a certain extent has its value, right? So, yes, having a positive mindset is important. This is why, in addition to being a coach, I'm a hypnotherapist. I believe so much in working on our minds, changing our mindset, being able to be generally positive people. At the same time, there's a balance and there is a place for logic, and for really listening when you are also being optimistic and hopeful and having faith, right? So, talking about objectification and talking about AD and the whole worthiness wound, the same way she allowed herself to be objectified by people around her, I think that she objectified Clay as well. I think that there was a large part of her who saw this man he's a good looking man. He is, athletic built, former college athlete. He seems very smart. He's an entrepreneur. He's, very good on paper. And I think that there's a part of AD who saw that as, okay, if I can make a man like that fall in love with me, then that proves that I am worthy because he is, some people would consider him to be high value. Um, and they look good together. They look very cute together. They seem like a decent match on paper. So yeah, I could see how being with someone like that would boost your self-esteem, would help with maybe making you feel worthy. The problem with that is finding your validation in another person is always going to be temporary, not just because the relationship may end or they may decide to leave, any of that, but also we are humans. So even when we are in relationships with people that we love, we're going to have our moments. We're going to have those times where, we're not at our best and we can't be the best partners. So then what happens when you put your validation in a person and you have a moment where you're not having great self-esteem, you're not having a great day. So you go to this person to validate you, and this person also feels down and they're not in the position to give you the validation that you need. You set yourself up for disaster. It is so important that you are able to validate yourself. So, you know, I think AD was Delulu in a lot of ways by looking to Clay for validation, by choosing to only listen to the things that she wanted to hear. Because I don't know how many times that man said he doesn't think he can get married because he thinks he's gonna cheat. If that had been a drinking game, there are some episodes that people would have been passed out by the end of it, right? Um, but there's just also this idea of, I mentioned it in the last video I did, AD herself said that she was Captain Save-A-Ho. This idea that you can save another person. I believe that everyone is special. I believe all women are amazing. I truly believe in Black girl magic, right? At the same time, we are not that magical. You can't save or fix someone who does not want to be saved. It doesn't matter how pretty you are. It doesn't matter how good your hoo-ha is. It doesn't matter how smart you are, any of that. If the person does not want to be saved, does not want to be saved enough for them to save themselves, there's nothing that you can do. And even if they're at that point, all you can do really is be supportive. They still have to do the work themselves. You know, AD's desire, compulsion to want to save people leads her to make bad decisions. And not just with Clay, with Matthew as well. And in the reunion, this is why I say that I don't think that AD's really learned her lessons yet. She admits to having gone out with Matthew a few times after the show was over. Someone who really, in a lot of ways, had some of the same issues as Clay, as far as an overinflated sense of self-importance, right? Someone who was lying and manipulative. Like, I don't understand where the scales would have been higher. You have Clay, who is telling you every second he's going to cheat, and then you have Matthew, who keeps proving over and over again that he's a liar and manipulator. Both of these are not great choices, right? So until she heals that worthiness wound and validates herself, I can see her continuing to pick men who she thinks that she can prove her worthiness through saving them. And again, setting herself up for failure each time. And that leads me to my final point. I saw a bunch of comments on TikTok, on YouTube, everywhere saying that eventually AD is going to be fine and she's going to marry a fine rich man and everything is going to be good. I do believe that eventually. And I say eventually because right now, I don't think she's in any place to date. I think that, first of all, you can see her already changing a little bit if you look at the reunion special and compare it to um, the season in general. You'll see that she started making some changes to her look, and I'm curious as to why that is the case, because I do think that Clay, I won't say that he didn't find her attractive, but I think that the type of woman that he wants is a woman who is a bit more glam, um, more of a LA, Miami type woman, if that makes sense. And seeing seeing AD glam herself up a little bit, I would hope that it's not for validation for someone like Clay. That's what I'm trying to get at. But if it is more just she's working on herself and changing, oftentimes you start to see outward changes in a person when they're on a self-development journey before you start to see some of the interchanges. So if that is the case, then I think that that's great. She's finding herself, she's finding who she wants to be as a woman. She may also be using Love is Blind as a way to develop her own personal brand, which I think would be fantastic. But yeah, she does not need to date right now. And this is also another thing that I often see with the women that I work with. And I want to say, particularly with Black women, is this idea of getting out of one relationship and being in such a rush to hop into another relationship. Because there's so much discourse about the idea of women needing to be in a relationship, needing to have a man. If you're a certain age and you're single, you've hit the wall, all of this that puts women under so much pressure. And, to quote the tortoise and the hare, I truly believe that slow and steady wins the race. You can get married in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, wherever, but to have a happy, healthy, successful marriage, whatever your age is, you need to have spent some time by yourself, really learning yourself, really learning what you like and what you don't like, knowing your triggers, doing some shadow work, delving into your childhood, seeing what patterns are unhealthy. And I want to say this, we all have parent issues. We all have mommy issues. We all have daddy issues. Even if you grew up in a two-parent home, even if your childhood was mostly happy, no one is perfect. And that means that none of us were raised by perfect people. So even if you have a fairly happy, quote unquote, successful childhood, there are still some things that have left you flawed because you were raised by flawed people. And it is important for all of us, even if we had the role models, even if again, the beginnings of our years were happy and healthy, and I kind of say that in quotes because it's relative, but even if that's the case, understanding what were the things that can be improved upon. I believe that that is the work that all of us have to do is heal from generational curses so that every successive generation is more successful than the previous one. Even if you don't have kids, you still have people in the generation under you that you influence, whether it's your nieces or nephews, whether it's younger coworkers, if you own a business, people that you might end up mentoring. So it is on all of us to do that work